So do I begin with the universal prayer?
Yeah.
Let's begin with the universal prayer. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is therefore one with every other. I welcome everyone, and I welcome especially Brother Pedro Oliveira to this platform of Indian section. So let me introduce the speaker before we begin. Pedro Oliveira was born in Brazil in 1957. He holds a degree in philosophy from the Federal University Rio Grande do Sul. Having joined the Theosophical Society in 1978 in Brazil, he has worked for it since then in several capacities. He served as the International Secretary at the Society's international headquarters at Adyar, Chennai, India. India from 1992 to 1996. He has worked as education coordinator in the Theosophical Society in Australia, president of the Indo-Pacific Federation of the Theosophical Society, and more recently as the officer in charge of the editorial office at the international headquarters. Mr. Oliveira has lectured extensively in many countries on the perennial wisdom, spirituality, mysticism, and comparative religion. He is the author of En Shri Ram, A Life of Beneficence and Wisdom. It was published in 2009 at Adyar. And the other book was CWL Speaks, C.W. Leadbeater's correspondence concerning the 1906 crisis in the Theosophical Society, published in the year 2018. His articles have appeared in a number of societies' international journals. Thank you so much for being here, sir, and a warm welcome to you. And over to you for the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And good morning to you all. It has been said that of the entire theosophical literature, which is very vast, and the modern theosophical literature started in 1877 when Isis Unveiled was published in New York, and it continues even today. It has produced an enormous amount of texts and books and so on. Nowadays, due to electronic media, it has produced many DVDs. Now we have the facility of having Zoom meetings. But it has been said that after all the theosophical literature, there are three fundamental gems. The word gem, I think, was used intently by whoever created this expression. I would probably say it was Dr. Annie Besant. And the three gems are the voice of, in chronological order, the voice of the silence, light on the path, the voice of the silence, and at the feet of the master. Light on the Path was published in 1885. The Voice of the Silence was published in 1889, and At the Feet of the Master was published in 1910. So they are very ancient texts from the point of view of the theosophical literature. The quality of a text like Light on the Path is difficult to underestimate because the language is very clear. Like many of these texts, some use of metaphor is used, but the teaching is very direct. And the teaching, besides being direct, it confronts us squarely, in the sense that it shows that in order to tread the path, or to find the way, as Light on the Path uses, one has to have the capacity to look at the machinations of the personal self. And this obviously is not something that pleases everybody. I could give you one example. How many politicians are known for their capacity of self-introspection and utter honesty, not only with their constituency, but also with themselves. But this applies to every person. What is called the way in Light on the Path is indeed the spiritual path. And Madame Blavatsky, in her translation of the teachings she received in Tibet during her training there, between 1857 and 1863 or so, in the words of the Voice of the Silence, the path begins where the human being is in his or her personal condition, and it ends bathed in nirvanic light. So it's a very profound journey of transformation. Obviously, it's not for everyone, for the simple reason that as I said before, not many people are willing to undergo this process of confrontation with the self. The Buddha, for example, had a very interesting teaching to his disciples, including his arhats, I would suppose. He said he was trying to explain to them the nature of the self, and he said that the self. He told the story of a stranger who visits a household. He arrives in the middle of the night, knocks on the door. The household wakes up, goes to the door, opens the door, finds this stranger very tired, full of dust, very weary. The stranger said, I have been on a long trip. I'm very tired and hungry. If you allow me to spend the night here, in any quarters that you may have, I will depart in the morning. So the householder looked at the stranger and took pity on the stranger, and opened the door, allow him to spend the night in a servant's quarters, and gave him some food, and went to bed. In the morning, all the family of the householder met the stranger, and they seemed to like him. And so the householder noticed that and allowed the stranger to stay for another 2 days, then for another 5 days, then a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, indefinitely. So the stranger became part of the household. One fine night, the stranger walked into the householder's bedroom, with a knife, and killed the householder and took over the property. And the Buddha said, the stranger is the self. We would add the me. We indulge in horse trading with the me, with the self. We don't think the self is dangerous. We think it's very natural. We have a cozy feeling for our own self. But only when serious crises happen, we can see how destructive the self-centered nature is. And Light on the Path alerts us to that as well. So, rule number 17 in the book says, seek out the way. So it advises the student to find the way that will lead to self-knowledge, to completeness, to liberation, if you like. And then rule 20 has certain very clear directives. For example, seek it not by one road. And you will see why. There are people in the world who have a devotional temperament, an intellectual temperament, a scientific temperament, a practical temperament, and so on. And the book says that the student shouldn't try to seek it only in one direction. And this is the teaching. To each temperament, there is one road which seems the most desirable. But the way is not found by devotion alone, by religious contemplation alone, by ardent progress, by self-sacrificing labor, by studious observation of life. The book is not saying that these activities are not wholesome or necessary or valid, but it's saying that to each temperament there is one road which seems the most desirable. Obviously, a person of a certain temperament will pursue activities and practices that harmonize with that temperament. But the book says, but the way is not found by devotion alone. This will not be easily accepted by many Christians and probably not many Hindus or members of other religions, because devotion for them is a paramount feeling. But every activity, every perception, every inclination that tends to be absolute within ourselves becomes an impediment. Those of you who have studied the Mahatma letters will know in letter 88 of the chronological edition that the masters are explicitly critical about the idea of a personal God, because they maintain that the idea of a personal God is a creation of the human mind. They seem to agree with Voltaire in this aspect. And yet, many people develop this devotion to a personal God. The feeling of devotion, as I mentioned before, is valid. But when it becomes absolute in detriment of other aspects of our nature, it may become an impediment. The other clause is religious contemplation. Do not seek it by religious contemplation alone. Again, there are many religious persuasions in the world, and if you examine these different traditions, they have developed, if I may say so respectfully, vrittis, right? They have developed their own modifications or grooves, so to speak, and people become convinced that the truth or God or the eternal can only be found through that kind of religious practice or contemplation. I'm reminded here of the teachings of a very great Christian mystic called Meister Eckhart. He lived on the 13th century in Germany. He said that when you truly pray, you don't exist. Only God exists. So any form of petitionary prayer is a limitation, a blockage, so to speak. Some people do tend to consider God as a trading counter. I know that from a very young age in Brazil, because I used to go to the Mass on Sundays, and they had to create a whole area in the corner of the church for votive candles, and people are making promises to God. If God fulfilled those promises, they would bring more candles. So this probably exists in a modified form in many traditions. For example, I have seen in Sri Lanka some people putting votive messages in a peepal tree. I was told then that they have their problems and they share with the trees their problems, which is a very wonderful concept. But the fact is that a religious activity which is based on expectation of results is a form of corruption. This is what Krishna Ji emphasized many times. I think he agreed with the Mahatmas, or the Mahatmas agree with him, that in the sense that if I base my spiritual life on expectations, I will probably create for myself a kind of a cocoon which is comfortable to me, but it will not move me forward on the path. Another aspect that is mentioned on rule number 20 is by ardent progress. There are some people who really want to progress spiritually, but they may want to progress spiritually on their own terms, right? I am reminded here of an old story of Mullah Nasruddin. A friend came to visit him in the evening and found Mullah Nasruddin under a lamppost looking for something in front of his house. And the friend asked, Mullah, what has happened? And Nasruddin said, I have lost my keys. I am searching for my keys. And the friend said, I'll help you. So they continued to search. And after half an hour, the friend asked Mullah Nasruddin, are you sure you lost them here? And Nasruddin said, no, I have lost them somewhere there. But I'm searching here because there is more light here. So somebody has suggested that the story suggests that we are seeking progress or happiness in areas where they are not. And the very idea of progress, some theosophical texts suggest, can be quite dangerous, because if you think you are in a position to make progress, that could be a concoction of your own mind. You want to be there. You may have a certain grandiose idea of yourself, and experience shows that if we nourish that kind of attitude, it may not be helpful. If you read about the history of the Theosophical Society in the early decades, you will see that many individuals frustrated themselves and frustrated the founders because they were convinced that they had already attained certain condition. in one letter to C.W. Leadbeater, Madame Blavatsky said that one of these individuals called Bawaji claimed to her that he had seen the masters in Tibet, and she was in touch with the masters, and they said, no, they have never seen him there. But in his mind, he was convinced he had. Another aspect of this quote is, by self-sacrificing labor. That's a very virtual form of activity. It is an activity in which one denies oneself, where one plunges into activity to help others. And yet, it can also be one-sided. For example, there is a great deal of activism in the world, and I'm convinced that the world needs activism. But as a former activist myself, I can see that it is very easy for one who is an activist to come very close to fanaticism. If we think that only through activism the world will change. So that there is the need for balance there. And then the last one is the most interesting one, perhaps, by studious observation of life, which is very necessary. Studious means a careful observation of life, of the processes of life, the experiences, and so on. That is very interesting. But in itself, it will not cause the student to find a way. Probably because there is the danger there of self-absorption. Jean-Paul Sartre is supposed to have said, actually wrote this, that hell is other people. Perhaps some of you may agree or not. That's not the point here. But someone who is interested only in the studious observation of life may not be very interested in interacting with others and let alone helping others. So all these steps or all these activities, although they are valuable and necessary and worthy in themselves, if they are taken one-sidedly, they don't necessarily produce progress. And this is what the next sentence under Rule 20 says. None alone can take the disciple more than one step onwards. In other words, one can take one step, but that's it. One does not proceed. And of course, the teaching will explain why. So I think this is a very important point. And I'll remind you that what triggered all this exposition was a very short sentence in the beginning, seek it not by any one road. So this way, which is the way of transcendence, if you like, the way of sacredness, the way of the realization of unity, of the essential unity of humanity, which is desperately needed today. I'm sure I don't need to convince you about that. This way needs to involve our entire nature. The rule says all steps are necessary to make up the ladder. Why do you use a ladder? Because you want to go to a different level, isn't it? From the level of the personal to the level of the non-personal. To see life from a non-personal perspective is very rare, because it implies that you have understood how everything that the personal self looks at in that very looking, in that very perception, there is some form of distortion. I hope I'm not offending anybody. If I do, I'll offend myself as well. But there is this reality that we need to deal with, that this ladder is aiming at taking us to a different level of perception. And then comes statements that are progressively quite shocking in a way, but necessary. The vices of man become steps in the ladder, one by one, as they are surmounted. This is precisely, it has precisely the same meaning as the statement in the Voice of the Silence, that each failure is a step to a different way of looking at life. If we understand that, of course, this is not an encouragement of failure, but eventually every human being has experienced some form of failure in understanding each other, and so on and so forth. So the vices of men become steps in the ladder, one by one, as they are surmounted. That means they are understood, and once they are understood, there is this realization that we can move forward. Dr. Annie Besant said something similar in her little book, The Laws of the Higher Life, a fantastic book. She said that there is a crucial turning point in the life, in the evolution of every person, and that crucial turning point is when that person has a glimpse, even if it is momentary, there is a glimpse that everything external cannot help him or her. That it is possible for us to continue to seek satisfaction, pleasure, realization, recognition outside, but they all come and go. And this person has this fundamental inkling or perception, momentary, perhaps a few seconds of perception, that nothing external can help. Nothing external can be of lasting satisfaction. And Dr. Besant said that causes the person to seek the path. And then it says, the virtues of man are steps indeed necessary, not by any means to be dispensed with. All traditions encourage the development of virtues. That's a very complex problem. We don't have the time to go into it. Mr. Krishnamurti challenged all of us when he said that a real virtue cannot be cultivated. It exists in itself. We don't have the time to go into this. However, and every tradition encourages virtues because virtues are important not only because of that person, it is because if a sufficient number of people in society do not develop certain virtues like honesty, kindness, pity, and mercy, and so on, then the society, as Sigmund Freud said, becomes a society of barbarians. So virtues are important. And the book says, yet, though they create a fair atmosphere and a happy future, they are useless if they stand alone. And in the history of the Christian tradition, one problem was created because some people were pursuing virtues, but because they pursued them personally, tinged by the personal self, they created what is now known as self-righteousness. In other words, I think I have developed virtues, others have not. Therefore, I am higher than them. And this is something that created and does create problems, you know. Um, um, there are many ways of mentioning this, right? Um, there is this American author called Mark Twain, and he expressed this in one of his books. He said, "I didn't attend the funeral, but I sent a note to state that I approved of it." That was his ultimate insult to someone who had just died. In other words, it is a form of irony, but he expresses what many people feel. So, although virtues are important, the virtues in themselves cannot take several steps up the ladder. Even the voice of the silence suggests that one can have will, renunciation, and so on, but if one does not develop compassion, one cannot proceed further. The path will not open up to someone who is self-righteous. The whole nature of man must be used wisely by the one who desires to enter the way. Of course, now we enter into a different dimension of the same rule. The whole nature of man must be used wisely by one who desires to enter the way. How does one use our whole nature wisely? It is for everyone to respond. But in view of what was said before, is that whatever efforts one may make, one should understand that maintaining a profound sense of harmony and unselfishness is very important. In one of the most moving passages in the whole of the Mahatma letters, when there was a criticism of Colonel Olcott, either by Mr. Hume or someone else, Alan Octavian Hume, Master K.H. says, "This is a man," referring to Colonel Olcott, "that travels ceaselessly, sleeps anywhere, eats anything if there is food, and makes all sorts of sacrifices for the theosophical cause." He even went further to say that he had postponed his own progress as a chela to remain with people. And he healed thousands of people in India through mesmeric passes until he became so weak that his master told him to stop. But this is the man who was not concerned with his own progress. And he was the president founder of this society. And I would think, as probably as a reward to that selflessness, in his own diaries, he recorded that when he was dying, or a few days before he died, the two masters came to his room, which became the Annie-Besant room at RDR, and thanked him for his work. And he was so weak, and that he left the bed and he prostrated before them, and then his master took him and put him back in bed. One thing that one should consider, ponder, and this could be a kind of a homework for all of us, why is it that all traditions insist on selflessness, particularly selflessness of motives. We don't have the time to go into all that. Then we come to another important passage, which is each man is to himself. Of course, when we use the word man, the text at that time there was no language inclusive language, so every human being, right, men and women. Each man is to himself absolutely the way, the truth, and the life. Just think for a moment the intensity of the revolution that would happen in humanity if at least some people, according to Brother G, 5% of people would really understand this principle and live it. Each person is to himself or herself absolutely, that means unconditionally, the way, the truth, and the life. That would means the end of psychological dependence, of religious dependence, of complete honesty in relationships, of not trying to take advantage of other people, but to accept them as they are. So if each person is the way, the truth, and the life, there is a foundation of a completely different way of life, which could revolutionize human society. And I would say that this is the reason why these teachings were given by the great adepts. The way is a way of life that takes us to this state of oneness. The truth is a realization of who we are, not just as a personality, not even as an individuality, but a pure spirit, a unconditioned consciousness. And then the life, that we would realize that the life that animates others and that animates all creatures and all beings on earth is the same life. This would be, I would say, the ultimate spiritual activism, to be completely transformed so that we could go into the world with a different attitude. The book then says that he is only so when he grasps his whole individuality firmly and by the force of his awakened spiritual will recognizes this individuality as not himself, but that thing which he has with pain created for his own use, and by means of which he purposes, as his growth slowly develops his intelligence, to reach to the life beyond individuality. Now the level of the teaching has become much deeper, right? One has to slow down here. It's very difficult to convey this idea for people who are completely identified with the personality, like probably most of us, if not all of us, to realize that we are not the personality and we are not even the individuality, that the individuality is necessary for our evolution. It becomes the medium between spirit or Atma and Ahamkara, which is the personality here in this world. But the book says that one has to grasp one's individuality firmly through awareness, through attention. Because the individuality, as the word says, still has a sense of ego in it, although it's not so concrete and material as our own personal self. And then by the force of his awakened spiritual will, recognizes that his individuality as not himself. That is even more difficult. Because the will, we cannot summon down the will to attend to the whims and cares of a personal self that has created this cocoon around itself. As Dr. Bezan has suggested, the will has a sense of nobility about it. It doesn't get involved in personal shenanigans, in trying to bypass others, or in trying to outdo others. It is too noble to do that. So it can only come and express itself in our minds when the minds are necessarily pure for it. And then what is the definition of light on the path for individuality? That thing which we have with pain created for our own use, and by means of which we purpose, as we grow, our growth slowly develops our intelligence to reach to the life beyond individuality. It is that thing which we have with pain created for our own use. And this is one of the mysteries in the theosophical teaching. It's very easy to study the human constitution on a whiteboard or on a PowerPoint slide, and when you have the 7 principles there. But there is a pain involved in the sense that this consciousness, which is complete, unconditioned, and that is Atma by definition, it can only express itself in this lower worlds through the action of an individuality. And I suppose this is the meaning of what Swami Subbarao said, that this is the Karana Sharira, right? It is that which is the repository of the quintessence of experiences. But even Karana Sharira doesn't have that splendor, spiritual splendor that Atma has. So there is a sense of limitation. And then the next stage is that as our growth slowly develops our intelligence, this is how evolution proceeds. If you look at it, and if you look at your own life, when I look at my own life, it's a very slow process. It's not a process of somersaults, you know. We are here today, and then the next day we are 10 steps up the ladder. That doesn't happen in human life, because the density of human condition and the accumulated strength of the human condition through many lives have forced the mind to look only in one direction and not from a broader point of view. So to reverse this process involved quite a great deal of energy. Even Krishnaji, who didn't believe in spiritual evolution as the traditional text says, he said that in order to do this, you need a lot of energy. Because this conditioning is like a 3-dimensional psychic rock weighing down us in life. So as our growth slowly develops, our intelligence, that means the capacity to perceive what is true. The word intelligence comes from the Latin interlegere, which means to read between the lines. It's a perception to see what is underlying something. The Mahatmas had this enormous capacity. They would put someone under probation, and they could easily see that that person would not succeed. But even then, they gave them that opportunity. The statistics that Madame Blavatsky published in the journal The Path in October 1886 were staggering. She said, out of the 72 people admitted by the Mahatmas as chelas, only 3 didn't fail, and only 1 fully succeeded. So probably this is the reason why she dedicated the book, the book, The Voice of the Silence, to the few. When I read that, I said to myself, she could have spelled the word few as P-H-E-W, because it's not easy. So as our growth slowly develops our intelligence, we then reach to the life beyond individuality. There is something beyond our individuality. In the same way that the individuality is beyond the personality, there is something beyond the individuality. Pierre de Chardin was a Jesuit. He was a very spiritual man. He was persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church. They didn't allow his books to be published until after he died. He was writing about what his kind of meditation was, and he said, I went into myself, and I was leaving behind the conventional world, the known world. Then suddenly I reached an area in which I didn't know myself anymore. And when I proceed further in my meditation, an abyss opened up beneath my feet, and I felt that my being, my very being, came from that abyss. When he knows that for this his wonderful, complex, separated life exists, then indeed, and then only, he is upon the path, upon the way. So this is the beginning of the way, to find that we need to take the steps up the ladder and go beyond the personality, and then go beyond the individuality. If you like, this is obviously similar to what the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali say, that we may begin with pratyahara, and then we move to dharana, then we move to dhyana. But dhyana, which is a very lofty state of meditation and contemplation, that's not the end of the road. According to the Yoga Sutras, there is a step further, and that is Samadhi. Seek it by plunging into the mysterious and glorious depths of your own inmost being. This is what we are enjoined to do in the theosophical literature and in the 3 gems. Light on the path, the voice of the silence at the feet of the master. To learn how to plunge within ourselves, to find out, to explore, to give ourselves moments of silence, of complete silence, not just the silence of the tongue, the silence of which Sri Ramana Maharshi called mauna, which is something complete, which includes the silence of the mind. And these are the glorious depths of our own inmost being. Seek it by testing all experience, by testing all experience, by having an objective relationship with all experience, and not by become identified with them. By utilizing the senses in order to understand the growth and meaning of individuality. And we will see how, as Mr. Rohit Mehta used to say in his classes at the School of the Wisdom, how the senses imitate the mind. If the mind is quiet, the senses will be quiet. And the beauty and obscurity of those other divine fragments which are struggling side by side with you and form the race which you belong. You see, at the personality level, we may develop what Dr. Tamini called dvesh. He explores that concept in the science of yoga. And he said, it's much more difficult if you allow yourself to express dvesha towards someone. It's much more difficult to remove that because it becomes ingrained. It goes into the primal separateness of things. And it may make an entire incarnation to be wasted. Not completely, but if that spiritual prospect was there, to remain in dvesha towards someone or other people doesn't pay. And the other defined fragments are the people we meet, not only our family and our TS members, you know, they are humanity as a whole, you know. In one of his talks at the Brockwood Park, Krishnaji said, the most heinous thing, the most unholy thing is to kill someone. Of course, we can say of killing someone physically, but to kill the possibility of a relationship with someone. And this, unfortunately, exists. Seek by study of the laws of being, the laws of nature, the laws of the supernatural, and seek it by making the profound obeisance of the soul to the dim star that burns within. The laws of being. You know? And Brother Sri Ram used to say that self-knowledge is the study of the law of our own being, which is not a metaphor, which is a reality. In other words, how do I find within myself a sense of order, which is not an emotional reaction or an intellectual concept, but it's a reality that gives me stability, harmony, and so on. The laws of nature, in order to reverence nature. Madame Blavatsky used to say that a theosophist learns a new alphabet on the lap of Mother Nature. So there is a new language there for us to learn, which some scientists are now learning. And seek it by making the profound obeisance of the soul to the dim star that burns within. Of course, this is a much advanced stage of the way. It's a much more advanced stage of the path. The dim star that burns within is the Atma Buddha. It is the monad in us, waiting to be discovered. Steadily as you watch and worship, its light will grow stronger. So if one's practice is sincere, but stays the course, then if one's sadhana stays the course, then this light will grow stronger. This light is the light of understanding, of wisdom. It doesn't come from the personality. It doesn't come from the individuality. It comes from the spirit within us. Then you may know you have found the beginning of the way. So that's the beginning of the way, you know. the larder has been left behind. It was a stage in our preparation. And then this the final secret. And when you have found the end, its light will suddenly become the infinite light. So that is the experience of someone who has realized the way. This could only have come from an adept, an elder brother, someone who passed through all the stages, who realized and who showed that this is a possibility for the human being. And this transcendental experience is the legacy of the theosophical literature. It is essentially important to the work of the society, and it is the promise of human regeneration.
Thank you, brother. Now I request Sister Sripriya to go through the questions in the chat box and put it before the brother to give answer.
Good morning. There is one question from Brother Raman. He speaks, he says, preoccupation with theory, doctrine, and philosophy can actually be harmful insofar as it distracts a man from the really important work of realization. Progress by offering an easier alternative, which is merely mental, cannot change its nature. This is put forth by Brother Raman. I think he would like to have your comments on this.
Well, I think that Rule 20 makes abundantly clear that all the dangers inherent on the path or on the way are within the human mind. So the challenge is, how do we understand the mind and not allow the mind to run amok or to convince us that it knows better. The mind is just an instrument, and therefore it should be treated as such. It shouldn't be forced into unnatural activities and so on and so forth. So every disturbance, every imbalance, every distortion that a student finds on the path or before the path, in the preparation for the path, is in the mind. The challenge is how to understand it.
Thank you. The next question is from Sister Arunima. She says, Sir, I like the saying, if you truly pray, you don't exist, only God exists. Is it the same as the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, where the outward manifestation as well as own self do not exist at all? What exists is the divine.
It may be similar. Probably Master Eckhart didn't know Sanskrit, although some scholars are now saying that he may have contacted Buddhist teachings and so on. But all great traditions say the same thing, that at that level of realization, the self is in abeyance. You know, this has happened, for example, to Sri Ramakrishna in India, right? He was taken to the sea, and somebody asked him, how does self-realization, liberation feels like? He said, just imagine a doll made of salt walking into the sea. And so the traditions speak differently of the same thing. But I would like to suggest that this experience does not mean that the person disappears forever from the world or from humanity or from their family. You know, there is reason to believe that Kabir, for example, experienced this, and he was still in the world, you know, like many saints, Saint John of the Cross, and so on. And after all, this is called the Bodhisattva path as well. They realize this glorious nirvanic light, but they come back into the world to be with people, to help, like the masters of behind the foundation of the TS.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Now I request Sister Subralina, is she there to sing the closing prayer? Thank you, sir, for your nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Pedro. Shinde speaking.
Hello, sir.
Hello, hello. Very nice exposition.
Thank you.
Closing prayer, Sister Subralina.
Okay, we are doing the closing prayer. Thank you all for attending this session. Om Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityormam amrutam gamaya sarve bhavantu sukhina sarve santu niramaya sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukhabhag bhave. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this session is closed now.
Yes.